Did you know that private banks help the rich pay less tax? And by less tax, I don't mean just taking advantage of every legal tax loophole there is out there. No, because apparently there's something else going on here, something more sinister. Before we go into this video, just want to say that this isn't an attack on any one religion or any religious figure. This video is about highlighting how tax evasion works and how it impacts all of us. And now, over to the video. Now, if you're anything like me, you probably think that taxes are a bit unfair. The government takes your money without asking, and then they just spend it on whatever they feel like. You probably also think that rich people cheat the system somehow. But have you ever wondered how exactly rich people avoid paying their fair share of taxes? Well, here are a few ways that they do it. One way that billionaires evade taxes is through churches. Churches, religious institutions, are allowed to own assets and invest them to generate income for the church and its members. For example, in the United States, the Catholic Church owns roughly $1.4 billion worth of property. That's the equivalent of about 28 mid-sized companies combined. And churches can earn interest on these investments without having to pay taxes on that income. So what many billionaires do is that they donate large sums of money to churches, allowing them to write off those donations on their taxes and reduce their taxable income. Or in other words, they use the church's tax-exempt status to avoid paying taxes themselves. According to a report from ProPublica and the Center for Public Integrity, America's ultra-wealthy have funneled at least $6.5 billion in donations to private foundations controlled by churches in order to reap huge tax breaks. These foundations invest the money and then distribute the earnings to charities of their choice. But there's a catch. Unlike regular charities that must spend at least 5% of their assets each year on charitable activities, these church-backed foundations only have to spend 3.5% of their assets, meaning that they can keep much more money in reserve for themselves. For example, one foundation backed by the Catholic Church invested $1 million and earned 10% interest on it, but instead of giving away $50,000 of that interest as required, the church foundation only had to give away $35,000, leaving them with $65,000 in profit. So not only are the rich using the church's tax-exempt status to avoid paying taxes themselves, but they are also taking advantage of a loophole that allows them to keep more of the profits from investing in charity donations. This isn't the only shady way that these organizations make money though. In addition to receiving donations from wealthy individuals, churches can also receive funds from corporations. According to a report from Business Insider, between 2010 and 2018, 9 of the largest banks in the world paid churches $7.2 billion in speaking fees, donations, and other types of compensation. For perspective, that's enough money to buy 2 brand new Boeing 747s every single day for an entire year. But wait a second, why would a bank pay a church so much money? Well, it turns out that they do it to gain access to their customer base. Churches have a lot of customers and banks want to be the ones who get their business. So they pay churches a lot of money to be able to market their products and services to that customer base. But there's a catch. The IRS considers these payments to be taxable income for the church. However, churches don't have to pay taxes on this income because they're tax-exempt organizations. So once again, the rich are using the church's tax-exempt status to avoid paying taxes themselves. But wait, there's more. In some cases, churches can even deduct the expenses associated with hosting these events. So not only do they not have to pay taxes on the money they receive from corporations, but they can also deduct the expenses associated with hosting these events. So let me get this straight. The rich pay churches millions of dollars, and then they get a tax deduction for doing so. And then on top of that, the churches can deduct the expenses associated with hosting these events. So essentially, the rich are getting paid to attend these events, and then they get a tax deduction for doing so. It's no wonder that churches are so popular among the rich. Well, hold on, because there's another way that the rich use churches to avoid paying taxes. According to a report from the Washington Post, some churches have been accused of helping the rich launder money. Laundering money is when someone tries to make illegally obtained funds look like they were obtained legally. For example, let's say you robbed a bank for $1 million. If you were to put that $1 million into your bank account, it would be pretty obvious that you had just robbed a bank. So instead, you might try to put that $1 million into a series of different bank accounts in order to make it look like it was obtained legally. One way that the rich launder money is through churches. Churches often have a lot of cash on hand because they receive donations from their members. So let's say you're a billionaire and you want to launder some money. You could donate a bunch of money to your local church and then claim that you did so on your taxes. The church would then have a lot of cash on hand and they could use that cash to pay for things like building maintenance or other types of expenses. So not only would you be able to avoid paying taxes on that donation, but you would also be helping out your church. These aren't the only ways that the rich avoid paying taxes, but they are some of the most common. Using churches to avoid paying taxes is a relatively new phenomenon. It started in the early 1980s when tax-exempt status was expanded to include religious organizations. Before this, churches had to pay taxes on their income, just like any other organization. But since then, churches have become increasingly popular among the rich, and it's easy to see why. By using churches to avoid paying taxes, the rich are able to keep more of their money, and they also able to support their favorite religious institutions. I think it's wrong for the rich to use churches as a way to avoid paying their fair share of taxes. Churches should be places where people can go to find spiritual guidance and comfort, not tax havens for the rich. According to a report from the Tax Foundation, the richest 1% of Americans pay about 24% of all federal taxes. Meanwhile, the bottom 50% of Americans pay about 0%. So when the rich avoid paying their fair share of taxes, carried interest is a way for investment managers to avoid paying taxes on their earnings, instead of being taxed at income tax rates, which can be anywhere from 12 to 37%. Investment managers can classify their earnings as capital gains. As you can imagine, this saves them a lot of money. In fact, according to a report from Bloomberg, the top 1% of earners saved nearly $20 billion in taxes by classifying their earnings as carried interest in 2018 alone. Closing this loophole would be a big win for taxpayers. It wouldn't be very popular with the rich, of course, but hey, another thing that we could do is to limit the amount of money that can be donated to churches. Right now, there are no limits on donations to churches, which means that the rich can donate as much money as they want and take a corresponding tax deduction. This allows them to effectively buy their way into lower tax brackets. For example, let's say you're a billionaire with a 37% marginal tax rate. If you donate $10 million to a church, a tax deduction essentially allows them to buy their way into lower tax brackets. For example, let's say you're a billionaire with a 37% marginal tax rate. If you donate $10 million to a church, you would save $3.7 million in taxes. That's enough money to buy a private jet. But limiting the amount of money that can be donated to churches would prevent the rich from taking such large tax deductions. Of course, the rich won't be happy about this. But again, sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. There are a lot of ways that the rich avoid paying their fair share of taxes. One of the most common ways is by using churches to their advantage. This isn't right. Churches should be places where people can go to find spiritual guidance and comfort, not tax havens for the rich. Of course, the rich won't be happy about this, but sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. What do you think? Should we do more to stop the rich from using churches to avoid paying taxes? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, take care.